For decades, the Himalayan frontier between China and India has been one of Asia's most sensitive and complicated territorial disputes. High in the mountains, where the terrain is harsh and the boundary has never been mutually agreed, the two countries have built roads, military posts and infrastructure as they seek to protect their competing claims. Once again, attention is turning to Arunachal Pradesh, an Indian administrated region that China regards as part of southern Tibet. India has accused China of increasing its presence and restricting Indian access to some areas. Beijing strongly rejects those accusations and argues that its activities are taking place within territory that China itself claims. The reality is that it is not a simple story of one side moving across an internationally recognised border. Much of the frontier remains disputed, and the two governments have fundamentally different interpretations of where that border should lie. China's position is that Arunachal Pradesh, or what it calls Jiangnan, has historically been connected to Tibet. India, meanwhile, regards the area as an integral part of the country and rejects China's claims. That disagreement has continued for decades, with neither side prepared to surrender its position. For communities living along the frontier, the consequences are complicated. Development and military infrastructure are often viewed through a prism of territorial dispute. A new road can be described by one side as economic development and by the other as strategic expansion. A patrol can be seen as a routine one by a government and provocative by the other. The history between the two countries is difficult. India and China fought a war in 1962, but there has been no full-scale conflict between them since. Even after the deadly Galwan Valley confrontation in 2020, both sides worked through military and diplomatic channels to prevent the situation from escalating further. That matters because neither China nor India benefit from another war. China has repeatedly called for the two countries to manage their differences through dialogue and cooperation. Beijing has also argued that the border should not be allowed to dominate the entire relationship between the world's two most populous countries. Trade, investment, tourism, and economic cooperation offer both sides enormous benefits. India, however, continues to link progress in the wider relationship to stability along the frontier. That position gives the broader dispute enormous influence over the broader relationship and leaves little room for compromise when domestic political pressure rises. For ordinary people living in these remote communities, the hope is simpler than the arguments being made in Delhi or Beijing. They want security, economic opportunity, schools, roads, and the freedom to live without the constant fear of political tensions and military activity that soldiers bring back to their communities. The challenge for both countries is therefore not simply deciding who is right about a line in the mountains. It is finding a way to disagree without that disagreement becoming something that could destroy peace.
The events of 2020 remain a warning about how quickly that fragile balance can break down. Soldiers from China and India fought in the Galwan Valley, resulting in deaths on both sides. Since then, both countries have increased their military preparedness, but they have also continued negotiations designed to reduce the risk of another confrontation. China argues that it has consistently sought a peaceful resolution and that the two sides should respect existing agreements, maintain communication, and avoid allowing individual incidents to damage the wider relationship. Beijing has also stressed that there is no need for India and China to view each other as inevitable strategic enemies. That is an important point because the relationship extends far beyond the disputed frontier. China is one of India's most important trading partners, while both countries have a shared interest in economic growth and regional stability. India's increasingly assertive approach to the border may play well domestically, particularly in a country where territorial sovereignty is an intensely emotional issue. But nationalism can make compromise harder and can turn local incidents into national confrontations. For China, the argument is that its claims should be addressed through negotiation rather than through pressure from outside powers or public political campaigns. The greatest danger is that both countries become prisoners of their own rhetoric, because if the dispute becomes a permanent test of national pride, ordinary people on both sides will ultimately pay the price.
The India-China border dispute is complicated, historic, and far from settled. There are competing claims, competing histories, and two governments determined to defend what they believe is their territory. But there is also an important reason for optimism. China and India have shown that even after serious confrontation, they can step back from the brink. Neither country wants another war, and neither can afford to sacrifice its economic future to endless confrontation in the Himalayas. For China, the message is that the border issue should be handled through dialogue, patience, and negotiation rather than confrontation. For India, the challenge is to protect its interests without allowing nationalism to close the door to compromise. And for the people living along the frontier, the priority is neither sovereignty nor geopolitics, it is peace, because they are the ones who live beneath the mountains where these arguments are being fought. And they are the ones who would suffer first if those arguments ever became war.